This man named Elgin has been full of mystery from the beginning of his story. He clearly seems to have a very strong connection to the supposedly magical side of this world he's found himself stuck in. And there's this monster we've been seeing for some time that has attached itself to him in ways that we've never seen happening with anybody else in this place. For one reason or another, this demon chooses to come back to him time and time again to try to get whatever it wants from him, and it only appears to him when he falls asleep. These attacks have become so bad and absolutely relentless that he's been completely unable to sleep for God knows how long. It just keeps coming after him night after night with no end in sight. But why is this being targeting him specifically when no one else seems to be affected by this kimono monster that repeatedly pursues him? The first time that we actually got a view of whatever this creature actually is, that was when it was pushing him under the water when he was trying to take a bath. At this time, the music box was still playing in the town, and that made it seem that this creature was some sort of illusion being made by the music box. But now that we've seen it recently, it's obvious that whatever this is its own separate being. What I want you to remember about Elgin is from the very first time he arrived in this town, it has been clear to both of us that there were secrets hiding inside of him that most people who've ever been in this place had no idea about. The incredible level of intuition he clearly had put him leagues above every other guy in this community. The things he was able to perceive were far beyond what all the other people in this town could do. And Elgin eventually reveals that the boy in white told him about the nursery rhyme in a dream. And this dream seemingly happened before he even entered Fromland, and because of what happened with Katri and Tabitha after leaving the hospital, we know for a fact that From entities can communicate with people who are outside of Fromland. When Sarah was talking about the voices, she said the voices told her that they had been waiting for someone just like her, that they were waiting for someone who could hear them, and that person was Sarah. What I think is happening with the kimono demon is that Elgin's mind is perfectly tuned for this creature to be able to communicate with him, just like the voices can only talk to Sarah specifically. When Elgin was with Fatima, he specifically asked if there was any body of water in the town, and that's because he saw something in his dreams. What I want to draw attention to is that this kimono creature is clearly dripping water while she was approaching him in his dream, and the first time we see it, it tried drowning him in the bathtub. Even back then, people were already making connections to the Lake of Tears. This is something that's been mentioned by Ethan multiple times over the course of this story, but the only large body of water we've been seeing so far has been the Brundles, but that's before season 3, because in this promotional screenshot, we clearly see a massive body of water that could easily be what they've been referring to this entire time as the Lake of Tears. The reason I'm bringing all of this up is that much like what we heard from the voices talking to Sarah, which said that they were waiting for someone who could free them, someone who could help them go home, it could easily be that this kimono monster is trying to manipulate Elgin into freeing it by implanting messages into his mind about the Lake of Tears. It's possible that this thing has been somehow trapped inside of the Lake of Tears, maybe in the same way as the worms or the music box were trapped in the dungeon, and it wants to convince Elgin to go and free it in the Lake of Tears one way or the other. But that's just one possibility. There's another one that is far more interesting to consider. Elgin specifically says that he feels as if he was being watched, but when he wakes up, he can't remember. This makes me think of what was going on with Martin and the dungeon. We all know that this entire situation might have been a setup from the very beginning, and the entire thing being a dream one way or another has been a very popular theory about it from the beginning of that scenario. This idea of dreams being able to become reality goes very deep in this story of From. Sarah theorizing the forest somehow gave life to Nathan's fear of cicadas, and Boyd specifically saying that the worms were like a nightmare under his skin. This theme of dreams and nightmares having power over the people of this town is extremely prominent in this story because of how we saw Boyd dragging the worms out of the dungeon, and then they became active in the world of Fromland, but they did not have any power to affect the people of this town before that happened. I think what the writers were trying to show us in those moments is that the monsters of this cursed Fromland cannot come to life, and therefore can't exact their desires until after a human gives them the capability to do it. So basically, this creature Elgin is seeing is trapped inside his dreams until Elgin himself decides to free it. And so far, But the only way we know for that to be done is through the dungeon dimension, which I personally believe is some sort of parallel universe or alternate dimension where people's nightmares and dreams exist. I talked about the monsters possibly being created from the dreams of the jellyfish entity before, that it specifically dreamed of the perfect soldiers who would be able to extract human suffering for its sustenance, and manipulated someone into dragging those monsters out of its dreams and back into Fromland, just like Boyd was manipulated into dragging the worms and the music box back to the town. Because of what the kimono demon is doing to Elgin, it appears to be a hostile creature. The first time it appeared, it started drowning him, and in this episode we see that it's preventing him from sleeping, and sleep deprivation is one of the most effective methods of torture you could possibly perform on anybody. It's by far one of the worst and painful things you could ever do to someone, and while you can easily live for months without any food, even lasting 12 days with zero sleep would be a total miracle. So while it's possible that it's somehow protecting Elgin from an even worse monster or something like that, it definitely seems to be evil as it is right now. However, it's been clear for the longest time that Elgin is one of the most special people we've ever seen so far in this story. Even in his very first introduction, he displayed knowledge of Fromland that no one else ever had. Even with other characters who clearly seemed to remember it in one way or another, he was the only one who explicitly expressed that he knew this place was dangerous almost immediately after entering the town. This made it clear that this man is unlike any of the other townspeople we've ever seen before. So I would not be surprised that something very powerful in Fromland is actively targeting him. These beings, despite them appearing to be as powerful as they do, they have very limited capabilities. This could have been why Tabitha made it to the lighthouse, whereas Boyd and Sarah were stopped before they were able to do that. Either the music box or the Abbey entity must have been responsible for that, but it can't be in two places at once. So while Boyd was engaging them, Tabitha was able to make it there unhindered because they could not stop her while they were in a conflict with Boyd. The reason why the humans have such an issue fighting these entities is because we have a massive informational disadvantage against them. This is why it's absolutely crucial for them to prevent us from gaining more information about the physics of Fromland, from the moving trees to the monsters. All of this was made to keep humans ignorant of the true reality. I said this in my season 3 trailer video as the reason why they're changing their strategy. The monsters are living in fear that the humans will finally be able to fight back. Boyd killing Smiley was a wake-up call, and Tabitha exiting the tower started a massive timer because the game is going to end. If the monsters don't wipe out the humans before a specific time, they will lose the game. This is why they can't just walk around waiting for us to mess up anymore. They have to actively prompt us into making mistakes. That was the entire point of what happened with the livestock, because if they didn't do that and the humans just stayed inside with their talismans, the monsters cannot do anything about it. The rules are the rules and they can't violate the talismans. If they violate them, they'll end up getting immediately disqualified, which likely means they'll be killed off or tortured by some super powerful being. I saw someone saying that these scarecrows Jim and Kenny ended up coming across are actually the monsters of a previous cycle, and that the cabins used to be the equivalent of the current Fromtown, but for a previous cycle. A lot of people have also been saying these scarecrows were the same things that were moving when Kenny and Jim were camping in the cabins, and when they wake up in the next episode, they'll find the scarecrows have actually changed positions to face the cabin. They were unable to get in because they had already set up the talismans for protection. That theory to me actually seems pretty cool, and I also want to point out there's these promo screenshots that could support the idea of Jim and Kenny finding out that the scarecrows were moving during the night. It's a fun idea, though I wonder if they're really monsters, what would happen if you separated the body parts during the day? It would be crazy if this is true and they end up bringing one of these things back to the town. One thing I need to bring up is about the nursery rhyme and how it may relate to Elgin. There's this idea that the From entity doesn't actually have a physical form, but his spirit or whatever it is uses the roots which Jade saw when he was in the underground tunnels to travel throughout Fromland and spy on the townspeople. Because the routes connect throughout the entire Fromland, it can easily and effortlessly go anywhere in Fromland basically instantly. We know from the boy in white talking to Sarah that these entities have telepathy, so it's easy to imagine that the Katri talking to Boyd, for example, is just an entity projecting that image into Boyd's mind. Of course, this opens up many different possibilities, like where Jade's visions are actually coming from. But what I want to bring up here is that the statement "they come for three" could be referring to three from entities looking for three new hosts that they could use for physical bodies. The three people who got infected by the skaters were Randall, Marielle, and Julie. So maybe what they were being turned into in the dungeon was some sort of empty shell that three from entities could inhabit. And there were actually three different corpses when Boyd found Martin, so that could be foreshadowing what was going on there. Marielle was also the only one of the three who actually saw the music box, so I wonder what that was about. Tilly is more suspicious than she's ever been with how creepy she was in Elgin's dream and her watching Fatima and her possible demon baby. If there's any character in the main cast who's been possessed by a demon of some kind, it has to be her because she's very suspicious. The next episode will be coming out in like 4 or 5 days, but watch this video I made on the season 3 premiere because there were so many things I never expected happening in this episode. It was very wild.